IVM.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories, India's very own travel podcast, where each week we share the journey of travelers in their own words and relive their experiences with you, our listeners.
Hey guys, welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories. Hope you're all well and keeping safe. On the podcast today, we have Priyanka Gupta, a traveler and a blogger at onmycanvas.com. Priyanka has already been on the podcast previously discussing some wonderful experiences in Himachal. So let's hop onto the episode today and see where Priyanka is taking us to. So with that introduction, we'd like to welcome back, Priyanka Gupta from the blog onmycanvas.com. Priyanka, thank you so much for being back on the Musafir Stories and welcome.
Thank you, Seth. Really happy to be back again.
Yeah, Priyanka has been nice enough to be doing her hat-trick episode with us. That's the third time Priyanka is recording with us. We've already done some wonderful episodes, one on Bhagsunag and the other on offbeat experiences in Manali. Right, both of them wonderful episodes, and we'll make sure to link them in the show notes. But Priyanka, for the first-time listeners, why don't you also give a quick introduction about yourself and your work?
Sure, Seth. Previous to writing and traveling sort of all the time, I was in software and finance. I did work in big companies and startups. I graduated in 2010, so I worked for about over a breaks of 2-3 different jobs. I worked until 2016, and 2016 was the year when I decided to pursue writing full time. Actually, it went well along with my plan because I also wanted to see more of the world, because I had just all the time had been busy working and studying. So the two seemed to go well together for me. In 2016, I went to South America. And then when I came back in 2017, that's when I started my blog on my canvas. And since then, I've been writing full time. And now for past 3 years, I've also been traveling full time. So I haven't had a so-called particular home for 3 years now. January 31, I would be completing 3 years. I travel with my partner. We have been going around India for the past 3 years, except for a month when we went to Vietnam.
Wonderful, and I think that's one of the reasons we wanted to have Priyanka back on the podcast too. She, like I said, from both of the previous experiences, how well versed she is traveling, and especially slow traveling in and around Himachal. And we thought it'd be a great opportunity for us and the listeners on the podcast as well to hear about some of Priyanka's exploits in the mountains, right? Slow traveling around in the mountains. So, Priyanka, I won't take away too much of it. Do you want to give a little bit of a background about the place we want to talk about today?
Yeah, thank you for your kind words, Seth. So basically, Himachal and the Himalayas is one of my favorite places in the world. I have been to Himachal so many times now, but in the last few years, I've spent 4 months in 2021, and then last year also I was there for about 4 to 5 months. I want to talk about Mandi today, right? So Mandi district is a place that I discovered because I was in a few villages of Shimla in my 2021 trip. The COVID second wave had just been passing through India, and somehow it had happened that my partner and I had begun our road trip, our indefinite road trip, because we had given up our home at sort of that March, April time. It was a bit of a scary time, but we first went to very remote villages of Shimla, which were offering homestays and places like that. We booked something online, and then the pandemic was extended, the lockdowns were extended. So we ended up staying in those villages of Shimla for about a month and a half. And from there, then the pandemic also sort of calmed down a bit, like the wave calmed down a little bit. The first place we went to in Mandi was a village called Pangna. And that's how we entered Mandi. Like, we didn't realize that we are booking into a different district now, but it just so happened that we went to Pangna, and from there began our journey into the Mandi district, which was really unknown to me until that point of time. It's a beautiful district. It has a lot of villages. It has a lot of shrines, lot of temples, lot of high peaks, which have temples at the top, and they're considered very sacred. It's a district that is still not very well traveled by the outsiders. So during our travel in 2021 and even in 2023, last year, we didn't find many foreign travelers. There were not even many Indian domestic tourists. It's mostly the travelers from Himachal Pradesh itself who go to Mandi for mostly religious travel, because they travel from one village or one city to another for visiting the temples that are popular of one place. So it's a beautiful place.
Yeah, absolutely, and yeah, the episode today as well will be a little different from the other episodes. A lot of times we discuss an itinerary about a particular place, the things you did, the places to check off when you visit that place, that type of discussion. But today will be a little different because obviously Priyanka has extensively traveled across the state of Himachal, plus even in Mandi and the Shimla district, she spent almost 4 months or so. So it's not that type of episode necessarily. What we intend on doing is more just giving you a sense of the slow life, right? So jumping into the conversation itself, and you mentioned that the journey into Mandi, the district of Mandi, began with Pangna.
Yeah,
Pangna, that's the first village you mentioned. Do you
Pangna.
want to
Yeah.
set a do you want to set a little bit of a background about what you saw there, your experiences in the village of Pangna?
Yeah, sure. So I was in Pangna for just a day, but I think that village sort of surprised me a lot because I've been to so many places in Himachal, and still it doesn't happen so often that I feel that I've gone back probably centuries. I'm not really joking when I say that, because we were staying in the government guest house there, because in certain villages sometimes you don't find any other homestays or hotels. So what we do is we look for a government guest house, and when I arrived at the government guest house in the evening at around 4 or 5 p.m., I was actually hurrying to get to the village because I had read that there is a fort in Pangna and one should definitely, see it. So by fort, I had thought that there will be something that I will have to climb up. And I was thinking it might get shut in the evening, so we should be there during the afternoon. I couldn't do it. So when I was there in the evening around 4:30 or 5, and the caretaker of the PWD guest house was there. PWD is like these are the government guest houses. Next to the guest house, there was a building that was so fascinating. I was looking at it, and the caretaker then told me, "Ma'am, this is Pangna Fort." And I was surprised because it didn't look like a fort. It was a tall Kathkuni architecture building that Himachal is very known for, where you have alternate layers of wood and stone. It was actually a temple and less of a fort. And it was fascinating to hear the story behind the fort. The king had the Sukit kings who ruled in Pangna until the 13th century. It was made by one of the king, because the legend behind the fort is that the king's daughter had committed suicide because the king didn't believe her. Someone told the king, a Brahmin told the king that, your daughter is friends with boys. And then the king was angry. And the daughter was like, no, these were my girlfriends who were just dressed as boys. And that was the story. But the king didn't believe her. And she committed suicide. And she said that, bury my body under a stone. And if I am telling the truth, 6 months later, you will still find my body completely undecayed there as it is. So 6 months later, the king did find the body undecayed completely, just as it is preserved. So then, in repentance, the king built the fort there. It's a beautiful old building now. A priest lived there. There are many little shrines. Cat was snoozing under a tree. and just still with the same stone and wooden slabs, and the huts, the rooftop of this villages were all slate, they call it, that the rectangular slate stones that they cut, and those are laid over the rooftops, slant rooftops. The whole village was like that, and the fort was the highest point of the village where we were standing. It is interspersed apple orchards throughout. It's still a very old style village, and there was just one temple. There are many other temples there, some a few hundred years old, and no one knows who built them. People still go there from different parts of the district and different parts of Himachal to pray. Fascinating place. My blog post on my canvas about Pangna, it links to a review on the village that I read. It is from like 1800s, I think. It was a review of how Pangna was then, and it's very detailed. So one can see how life in Himachal in that small Mandi village was then, because it was amazing to read some of the things.
Yeah. I believe like almost like a city survey type of a thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it was a village
Priyanka, is
survey.
what you're referring to?
It
Yeah.
was done by the Census
Yeah.
of India in 1961.
Yeah, stunning to look at, like you mentioned, and even by Himachali standards, I would say I was also very taken aback by the fort. Right, it's very different and pretty tall for a structure, and it's not even broad, right? Just tall.
Just tall.
So that way, yeah. So that way, it was pretty unique and different from what I had seen in other from other Himalayan places and structures. But yeah, definitely a very interesting introduction to the district of Mandi. Now, you said you only spent a day or two in Pangna. Do you want to share your experience in one of the other villages you may have stopped by after this, Priyanka?
Yeah, sure. From Pangna, I went forward to Chindi village. So Pangna to Chindi would be like just about an hour of a journey. This is again, this village is not very well known outside. Like I had never heard of Chindi village, neither of Pangna, but never of Chindi either. It's a apple farming village, so all of the villagers have apple orchards. It's just a very simple apple farming and other kind of farming. That's what all the villagers were doing, and that was sort of my base for a few days, because everyone in Chindi was talking about going to these two, three temples that again I had never heard of. One is called Shikari Devi, and another one is Kamru Nag. So when we arrived in Chindi, sort of we was spending some time around walking. So I would get out of the guest house and would just a path went down the government guest house. It would lead me into the village. It was just those pine forests, and at that time, a lot of pine needles had fallen, so the villagers had collected them in piles, and they would take them home to either spread them under the cow, which they also store all those pine needles for the winters. So I would just make my way through those uh, like large collections of pine needles, and then go sometimes talk to the villagers. Someone would be going with their cows into the forest, because in Himachal, most people take their cows out for grazing from morning until afternoon at least. Or I would just stop by to chat with the little children. Uh, they would invite me to their apple orchards. I spent quite some time in that village as well. And then, of course, I went hiking up the Shikari Devi mountain and the Kamrunag mountain, both of which were again fascinating experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely touch upon some of those points as well about the treks and the experience you had with the treks. But even within the village, right? Like you said, a really, really dreamy looking village. And the way you've written your blogs as well, Priyanka, it comes across like a novel almost, right? Where you literally describe the way of life. It's not a blog where, oh, I got here, I did there, I did that. Obviously, because you were here for an extended time, you kind of get that feel too. It's really, really laid back, and these little experiences you have in these villages, right? Like you mentioned, running into those little girls
Yeah.
by a watering hole, chatting with them offering to take you to their orchards, like really innocent and pure, right? That's the feeling. And over the this past few days where I've been reading your blogs, it almost feels like I've been reading a novel, right? Where you literally describe life on the hillside or on the countryside. It's that type of feeling, right?
Oh, wow.
So really enjoyed reading that as well, and even little things, right? I mean, it's great that one is describing the beauty of a place or its history and significance. All of that is great, but like you mentioned, just chatting with those girls about their challenges, right? What they face, what they
Yeah.
like, what they don't like about certain things. I don't know if you want to touch upon some of those challenges, like still patriarchy in the society and stuff like that, which you have beautifully documented in some of those posts.
Yeah, Seb, thank you for bringing that up. Actually, it really relates to me because as a girl from, again, a small North Indian town, as I often write on my blog, I'm from a small town in UP where at the time when I went to Kota to prepare for IIT and I was only 15 years old then. I just completed my 10th standard. So when I went to Kota, quite a lot of people, and my mother only told me this later, quite a lot of people started coming to my home to ask my mother that how have you sent your girl to a place as far as Kota. Kota was 14 to 15 hour by train from my city. So having come from that sort of a background where I am now, and I have gone through a journey where I have also fought for to be free, to be able to travel on my own, to do things the way I want to do. When I go to Himachal and I meet the people there, or I talk to the women there, or I talk to the girls there, and they're kind enough sometimes to share their stories with me. I feel this, or I hear this longing, and this gap is still there. Like in a lot of in towns and in cities, things have changed, but in the villages of Himachal, life is still. It's a lot about staying with the family, and it's a lot about what you can and you cannot do. Sadly, so patriarchy. When I say that in my hometown there is patriarchy, and I've had to fight for things. There was patriarchy from what I saw in the villages I visited. I'm not sure if that is the case for all the villages of Himachal, but for sure I can say that for some of the villages I spend a lot of time in, and that is in Shimla as well as in Mandi. So they were basically, as I said, like when I went down from the guest house, there was a watering hole, and the girls of the families would fill up their pots from it because they needed water to spray medicine on the apples because the apples don't survive. So they spray medicine, and it might also come as a surprise to many people that uh, a lot of apples are also sprayed upon with color, so to make them
Yeah, I was shocked after I read that.
so yeah, to make them dark red because apparently that sells more because people buy the fruit that looks better. Some people
Yeah.
buy the fruit that looks better. So they were just filling water from there, and by the time I had been going in the village for the past few days, I would just go and I would go to the village, walk down, sometimes turn around from a home because I would be too uncomfortable going further up ahead because everyone would be looking at me because they weren't used to visitors just strolling about in the village. That small is that village, and that people would go to the guest house and return from there. But I don't know what was always in me that I always am interested in their life. So I go in. I'm that kind of an intruder, and then. Uh, so they knew me, these girls knew me, and they were hanging out around the watering hole. They were filling their water cans to go to the orchard to spray the medicine, and then they started talking to me. And because I was going about freely, I was writing, I had my book, I had a pen, and they were like, so how does your family allow you to be like this? Because I was not dressed very traditionally, and I was just going about on my own. So it was very interesting to talk to them because for them it was very surprising what I was doing, and I told them that for me also life was very challenging. Life was, not so easy. I had to fight for my own freedom, or you can say that I also had to tell my family that I want to travel and want to go on my own. And so these girls were sharing their stories that how they're in school, and after school they're supposed to get married, and they cannot drive the bikes that the boys are handed over as soon as they're like 15 or 16, and they don't have to do any house chores. They can come and go anywhere while the girls have to be. So I was talking to them about it, and I felt their pain. I could relate with it because I understand where they're coming from. So yeah.
Yeah, some interesting conversations, and again, firstly, more power to you, Priyanka. You've kind of fought your own battles and won them and gotten to where you are. And obviously, I don't want to be preaching to anybody, but really hope and pray that other girls and other kids, right? They like in some obviously girls do face this first most, but other parts you might even see this with kids in general, right? They may not have the ability, and a lot of it also comes out of privilege, right? I'm speaking from a position of privilege because I've had the ability to do certain things in life, and some of the others may not even have that. So let's hope and pray that even those kids and the girl children have the opportunities that a lot of others that like me and you have had in the past, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely.
and Priyanka, one of the other things in Chindi village, right,
Yeah.
that you mentioned earlier on was the popular treks from here, right? So, do you want to mention about your experience of trekking to these two very popular temples too, the Shikari Devi and Kamrunag?
Yeah, sure, Sav. So Shikari Devi is one place. Again, I've been saying this again and again. It might sound repetitive, but Shikari Devi is another place that I hadn't heard about. And it's one of those places that will always be very, very special for me because and you'll understand why as I talk about the place going further. It's a mountain that is about 3,400-meter high. uh, Everyone in Mandi district and outside as well knows about it. People from as far as Kullu and even further would earlier in the days would walk for days to reach the temple, to reach the top of the hill, which is the temple, because they believe in that temple so much. They believe that this temple, this Shikari Devi, would make their wishes come true. It's an amazing journey because through from all the villages in Mandi district, Shikari Devi is reachable by foot. Now a road goes up to the temple top, almost to the temple top, and most of the people go by the road, and even a bus service has started. But earlier, there was no other way but to go on foot. And you go through a very deep jungle. So when my partner and I, we heard about Shikari Devi, and I heard how wild of a trek it is because it goes through a jungle. Like after a village at a point, for hours, you don't have any human inhabitation in between. It's 3,400-meter high, and I've been to places higher than that, but in many ways, it felt more wild, colder, stormy, everything. So one fine day, we decided to go from Chindi village, do this trek. We knew the way. The weather was sort of going a little bit cloudy, but sometimes the weather in Himachal is like that. It just clears up in 15 minutes or it just suddenly becomes stormy. So we had decided we'll go there. We started our journey. We knew the way. We started climbing up. We crossed villages that were at that time it was apple time. So all the villages and the orchards were like red with apple. We're climbing up and up. Almost the entire way goes up. In between, after a few villages, the villagers were very concerned. They were like, all right, but you go and you take the name of God and you go because they're very religious and they really support anyone who is going to Shikari Devi. So we went. They said that you follow the way and don't go away from the main way, otherwise you would get lost. And this is a very wild forest, so there is also, of course, the fear of wild animals. So that day we started maybe in the morning and arrived at Shikari Devi in the evening. We went through the wild forest. After that village, there was nothing in there. Only once did we meet some travelers who were returning down from Shikari Devi. And there are many ways in between, like there are tracks, but they all sometimes like there was one wide track, but there were other little tracks as well that shepherds must have been using. So sometimes you might lose your way around there. But we got a bit lucky because the travelers we met on the way, they had a dog with them, and somehow the dog decided to leave them, and he started following us, and then he went up with us until the top. So the dog knew the way because sometimes he would just, if there were two ways, he would just go on one way and wait for us, sort of. So we just kept going with him, and he was there for us, and we were there for him, and then that's how we reached the top. We had again, there's only one government guest house there at the top of the hill, and when you come out of the forest at the top, you feel as if you're on the top of the world, like rolling beautiful blue Himalayan mountains until the horizon. Some peaks are like icy, and then some of the nearer stretches are like pastures, and horses and cows are all grazing around, and then deep dense just patches of forest, some suddenly green, and then there's blue, and then it's beautiful orange and purple sunsets and sunrises. It becomes quite majestic.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that at least you did. I mean, you decided to trek and take the age-old route of reaching Shikari Devi rather than take the new road and the easy way out, right? So it does make for quite the experience. And thanks to Scooby, I guess that's what you decided to call the dog. He also led the way in a
Yeah,
way,
that
right?
dog was our savior. He was the loveliest dog ever. I mean, many a times in the mountains, dogs just come and join you on the walk, and but they also leave you. But this particular dog, he had something for us that day, because it was, again, as we said, it was foggy, and there were not many people. After we met those travelers, we didn't meet anyone except some shepherds in the forest, from whom we were a bit scared, because before
Right.
heading to the trek, a woman at the dhaba had said that once it's kind of a gory story. It's like the shepherds of the forest had probably killed someone, and she said a gory story about someone. So she was sort of trying to warn us, but it was also a bit scary. And then we had Scooby, and then we ran into the shepherds in the forest. These shepherds were not ones who were coming and going from the forest. They lived in the forest, so their family was there, their huts were there, the sheep was there. And when they saw Scooby with us, and they saw how good the dog is and how he's walking with us, they wanted the dog. So,
Yeah.
so that also happened. Nothing happened eventually, and we got out with the dog.
Thankfully, nothing happened,
Thankfully,
but yeah, that also adds to the overall trek.
yeah,
And I mean, for me, the gladdest part was, I mean, obviously, once you made it to the clear and you could see the temple from there, and then welcomed by a group of dancing devotees. I mean, yeah, visitors who were there to visit the temple but were doing their own little picnic or whatever on the meadows, right? So
yeah.
I was really
They were from
happy and
Kullu,
glad.
so they had walked more than us. Like they had walked probably for 2 days, and they were a big group, and they were dancing on the hill, and they invited us, and so we danced with them. And it's still going foggy, and we are tired, our legs are breaking, and but we're dancing, and they were such a happy group. It was
Yeah,
amazing.
absolutely. So all of that, yeah, definitely adds to the experience of the trek, and obviously capping it all off by visiting to the temple. Yeah, and the Kamranag is also a similar type of like a holy place. It's a temple, and you did a similar trek to Kamranag as well, and that's from a different village, though, right,
Yeah.
Priyanka?
Yeah, so basically, we could have gone from Shikari Devi to Kambunag as well, but we decided not to do that, because these are like high mountains, right? They are connected through the mountains again. Like you can walk
Right.
from one place to another place. These are all high peaks, and in between, they don't get cut down by any deep river or such. Unless a river cuts through the path, you can always go from peak to peak. But we didn't go from Shikari, because when we were up at the top of Shikari, the weather got really bad. We were supposed to leave the next day, but we ended up staying one more day, and then we left the next day, and that was when we really lost our way. But luckily, we got out from another village, and that's why we didn't walk from Shikari to Kamru Nag. But it's another very revered god. It's again about 3,300-meter height, and we went there from a village called Rohanda. So we could have gone from Chindi as well, but most
Okay.
people go from Rohanda. There are direct trails from there. Like it's a more walked upon trail, because still no car goes to Kambunak. So a lot of people after the COVID second wave were visiting Kambunak temple. The temple had finally just been recently opened when we visited there. So that was not as difficult. You still like to go up through the forest and around rocks, and sometimes you're clambering up, and here and there you're going, but it was still not that tough because there were more people on the way. And at the top, there was a temple, and then there was a lake.
Wonderful. I mean, yeah, sometimes you also need a break from all the action, right? And just want to have a simple
Yeah, I
journey
was
to
glad.
the top of the trek. So I'm glad
I
that,
was glad for the help for the people.
exactly, glad that it worked out. The other very simple yet really interesting thing I found about in one of the blog posts was also your experience apple picking, right? Do you want to share little bit about that? And this was in
Yeah.
a village called Karsog. Is that a village or?
It's Karsog is a village, yeah. So my experience of apple picking was and has always mostly been in another village that is above the Karsog Valley. Karsog is sort of like a
Okay.
rice valley. It's um it is still at a height, but when you talk about Karsog in Himachal, you see like rolling terraced mountains, and they look sort of at the ground level, but they're not because they're at ground level in comparison to the places around Karsog. And in the surrounding Karsog is the lowest lying land. So as I said, like it's a valley, and it's a rice valley because all the terraces there, people grow rice on them, and it looks very beautiful because all around the Karsog Valley, peaks are rising high up, like this beautiful blue green peaks, and in between the rice valley sits. And where I have usually stayed in Mandi district, in a village which is above Karsog, like from that hill on which this village home was, we could see Karsog down below us. And like many villages and many homes in Himachal, you would always see that associated with the house, they would also have a hill which is their own. Like if a home is on sort of a mountain on a slope, they get part of the hill as their own agricultural land for their own orchards. Either they bought it that way or it was allotted that way. So the family home we were staying in, it's a village called Nalagalli. It's very hard to find it on a map. And we stayed there at a family's house, and they had a big apple orchard. And I was there, luckily, at the time of apple picking. I was there in August. Towards the end of August and end of August, everywhere in Karsog, because it's a lower area, so the apples ripen earlier than other places. Let's say higher up in Shimla or Kashmir. So the apples ripen up earlier, and then I was just there. I had traveled a lot. I had already done the Shikari trek. I had already been hiked up to Kamru Nag, and I was just writing down about all these experiences at the family home. And one day I saw my host that she's heading to the orchard with some other women, and they have all these long baskets. They call it kilta. It's a long plastic basket that they carry on their backs with the straps, and they were heading into the orchard, climbing down the hill through the tall grass. And I realized that they're probably going apple picking, and I asked them if I can come with them. And then I went, and then we climbed trees and plucked apples, and that was a lot of fun. I self-invited myself, and they were kind enough to let me join. So that was a beautiful experience.
Yeah. No, another definitely fun experience. I've done a strawberry picking. I'm doing air quotes, but I've done one of those. But yeah, it's totally different. It's a commercial experience, right? Where basically they open up strawberry farms for everybody to come and pick, and literally tens and tens of people are doing that around you. And it's also a lot for the pictures, as you would see mostly today. A lot of them just want to take pictures and post. But I'm glad that you got an opportunity to do some apple picking and I think as we touch upon this, right, obviously in Himachal and the hilly areas, like fruits and vegetables, obviously a lot of them grow it for profit, like they sell it too. But some of the others, other experiences I saw, right? Like another village. I don't know if it was another village or the same village, but you came across somebody picking radishes and cleaning radishes rather, right? So they also grow their own food, which is also amazing.
Yeah, As I said, like Himachal, a lot of people in Himachal live by the land, they live by their hands and they live by the land. So they grow, even if they're not growing commercially, the culture from the uh, past many centuries has been that they have the land. So they grow food at least for themselves, their families, the relatives. So they grow the basic vegetables. Even someone with the tiniest bit of land or with the largest orchards, they all have their own patch of vegetables, which is mostly radish and carrots and onions and garlic, potatoes, uh, cucumbers. They have this huge cucumbers. They call it kakdi. They have tomatoes, they have eggplants, many kind of gourds like pumpkin and all of these things. They consider it, they grow it all so much even in their smallest bit of land that they feel like that we shouldn't have to buy from the market. Let's just eat what we have at home, what we have grown. So that culture is still around there, and a lot of people, though the agricultural land is reduced, like a lot of agriculture and farming land is nowadays in Himachal is lying barren, unused, because not everyone wants to continue to plow and sow because it is hard work, and people are now inclining a bit towards jobs and more stable income and to tourism. There's still families who grow their own food, have their own fruit trees. Sometimes it's enough to sell some of it. Like this family that I stayed with in 2021, at that time they could send like 18 boxes of apples, but last year in 2023 there was not enough to sell, so they just had it for the family. I ate a lot of apples, and I ate, I think, the most of their apples. It was just the rest of it got spoiled. It's just like that. They eat from vegetables from their farms, and they eat fruits from their trees. Even one peach tree or one plum tree is enough. Like you cannot finish it food. It gives like 40, 50, 60 kilos of fruits. You can't eat that. So that's something quite amazing. Like if you anyone who is going to Himachal should really experience this. Like live in local villages, live in their homestays, try to eat the kind of vegetables they're growing. And the families are, most of the families were kind and nice enough to just offer the fruits themselves. So they were like, you can just go and pluck it, and there is so much of it that they kindly share that. And it's, some of it is very good organic food, like it's medicine free because it's for home, they don't spray anything on it. And that's one of the most fascinating things about Himachal. I think whenever I live there for the few months, I never buy fruits from the market.
And Priyanka, while we are chatting about how most of the stuff is homegrown, just in terms of your food and meals for wherever you're staying there too, right? Anything unique or anything you'd like to share that stood out for you?
There are quite a few things that I absolutely love eating myself. One is the colocasia leaves, like the arbi, we call it in Hindi, the root. So I didn't know this, but mostly people in North India eat patrod. That is the sort of a fried version of the leaf, which is prepared with the chickpea powder, besan, and then you sort of make a fritter of it. But another way the locals of Himachal eat it is as a green curry. So they make a paste of the leaves and then they sort of cook it, and it's absolutely delicious. So that is one thing that stood out for me. Like, and it grows in the hills locally. So when you have no other vegetable, they would, at homestays or any other place we were at, they would be making that and they would offer us as well. And it's quite delicious. So that is one thing. I myself make it now, and really like it. Like, I like pluck my own. When I live in that village house now, like last year, I plucked my own leaves from their hill and I made made the curry myself, and it was really great. And then another thing is called lingudi. Uh, it's called lingad in
Okay.
in Himachal. People call it lingad, and it's a fern that grows near the water, near the creeks and near the brooks. It's a wild fern, and you would often see little girls or women or just about any villager sitting by the highway sides, and they would be selling a bundle of it. It looks like stalks of. It doesn't look like asparagus, but it's like stalks that thick and long. And it is a very good vegetable. It's highly nutritious. It's one of those medicinal herbal plants, but also that tastes really good. And I didn't know about it before I went to Himachal. It's also sold in shops, but mostly if you're living with a family or if you're living somewhere, people just pluck it from near the brook and then make it with cumin, and it's a great thing to have. So if anyone is in Himachal, they should really try and ask for lingar.
Okay. Yeah, some of these names, I think I'll have to reach back to you to confirm
Yeah.
before I include them in the show notes. But yeah, very, very unique and quirky. And anything else you were going to add, Priyanka?
There's also in Mandi district. There's also the Mandyali dham that you eat. It's a thali. It's a vegetarian thali mostly. It's a meal of kadhi, rice. Sometimes you get chapati or not. Then there is a sweet preparation of pumpkin. It's quite delicious. Then you have maybe chana, and then you have rajma, and then you'll have some other gravy. It's a full meal. A Mandyali dham is usually eaten at weddings. A dham is usually eaten at weddings. The wedding festival meal is called dham, but in Mandi district there is this culture of Mandyali dham. So they eat the whole plate even on just regular days. And that is also something that should be tried when one is in the district. You get it in roadside dhaba sometimes as well. You get it in Mandi city in a few places, really good. And even in the homestays or in the smaller hotels, you can ask for it. And some families often do make it, especially on festivals. And it's a great meal. It has all the components in it, and especially the sweet preparation of pumpkin that is very, very special to Himachal. You don't get that pumpkin sweet preparation like a dessert anywhere else.
Okay. Very, very interesting. Yeah, the Himachali dham in general is pretty popular, right? As
Yeah.
the dish one should definitely give a try when in the States. So thank you for calling those things out. And as we begin to wrap this up, even just in terms of any of the other experiences in and around the vicinity, right, Priyanka, that you may have done, and obviously because there's so much, we can't really fit everything into the episode. But is there any other places or experiences you'd like to call out? One can indulge in when in the area.
Yeah, so it's because, of course, the district is quite big and it has a lot of places to see and a lot of mountain peaks. It also has lakes, so I would suggest people to also look at the lake. There are two primarily that really always call me back to them. One is Revalsar Lake, and another is Lake Prasher. Revalsar Lake is quite a bit low. It's not at that height, but Prasher is a lake up the mountains. Like Revalsar is about 1360, like 1400-meter high, and it's a beautiful lake associated with a lot of religions and culture. Like Buddhists consider it sacred, Hindus and Sikhs all consider it sacred. There are monasteries and temples and gurudwaras around the lake. So that's again a very beautiful place to visit and culturally very intriguing, given how many different kind of mountains surround it and how this beautiful pristine lake sits in between. And it is one lake very nearby to Revalsar Lake. There are also again a cluster of 6 to 7 lake called Sarkidhar. That is again a very interesting place to visit. Then there is Prasha Lake, again a very sacred place. It is reachable from Mandi town. It's not that long a drive, or one can trek to Prasha Lake from Mandi, not in the monsoon times because it gets very dangerous at that time. But this lake is at about 2,700 meters, and it's again a journey and a destination on its own. You can camp near the lake on the mountains, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Yeah. So Revalsar, Prasher, and Mandi town as well. Mandi city is very interesting. It's a very historic city. It has very old temples, century-old temples, and they still exist there as it is. It has beautiful food and sort of those kind of old cobbled lanes that you go through, and then the whole river in between, and then the old bridges on the river, one of which was, I think, destroyed in the rain last year in 2020. And then the old temples, fascinating city in itself.
Yeah, often referred to as Choti Kashi,
Yeah,
right? Given
absolutely
the
right.
amount of temples and religiously significant points, and also almost like little ghats. So I believe this is on the Bias River,
Bias
right?
Nadi. Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a lot of points. I mean, we've always looked at Himachal or important places in Himachal like Shimla or Manali as honeymoon destinations primarily, right? But
Yeah.
beyond that too, there's so many, like from a religious aspect or from a purely nature aspect. And even this version, right, where you've slow traveled it, you got a chance to look at it even from a rural aspect, how the day-to-day life is of the people who live in these villages. So thank you
Yeah.
so much for giving us this really new perspective about travel and slow travel in Himachal, Priyanka. Just to wrap this off, Priyanka, for listeners and others who'd like to follow you and your work, what would be the best way to keep up with what you write?
Thank you so much, Seb, for having me. I publish regularly on my blog on mycanvas.com. All the kind of places I visit, at least one story is always up on the blog. And so anyone can reach me through that. My email is also something I look at regularly. It's hello@onmycanvas.com. And I do have a newsletter that I call Looking Inwards. And I publish it through Substack and I send it once every week. You can subscribe to it through my blog. So that is also a great way to stay connected with me and to have a sort of a current news on the kind of journeys I'm having, and it's sort of a behind the scenes, like where I am, what I'm doing, what I've read, what I'm writing, what I've seen, what I'm experiencing, sort of that. So my blog, my email, and my newsletter.
Thank you so much for sharing all of those contact details and how one can follow you and your work, Priyanka. We'll make sure to include all of that in the description of the episode as well. And yeah, overall, again, like I said, thank you very much for being back on the podcast again and sharing some wonderful stories from Himachal and really giving us a very different perspective to Himachal and travel within Himachal and with specific focus on your time in the Mandi district. Thank you, Priyanka, and hopefully we can have you back on the podcast sometime in the future as well.
Thank you, Saf, so much for having me. It's always great talking to you, and I hope to be back soon.
That was yet another great episode on the Musafir Stories. Make sure to show us some love by sharing the podcast with your friends and family. We are on Instagram and Twitter at Musafir Stories. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM podcast app or the website. Follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram.